I'm Keith Olbermann, and this is The Resistance. The President of the United States is self-destructing. We need to give him all the help we can in his task. This is not said lightly, even with this president, even in this atmosphere of daily, if not hourly crisis. This is an issue of deep regret. Ordinarily, the last thing in the world any American would want is a leader bent on destroying himself and ending his presidency. But the threat to our freedoms, our heritage, our way of life, our lives themselves is so overwhelming and unprecedented that putting aside the almost immeasurable anger and resentment that this childish, petulant, selfish man engenders, it is still with genuine sadness that we must look at his self-destruction and say it simply and resolutely, better him than our country. Trump advisors and confidants describe the president as increasingly angry over the investigation, yelling at television sets in the White House carrying coverage, write Jonathan Lemire and Julie Pace of the Associated Press on June 16th. He has watched hours of TV coverage every day, sometimes even storing morning shows on his TiVo to watch in the evening and complain nonstop, writes Josh Dawsey at Politico on June 15th. We will ignore for a moment the thought that somebody still has a TiVo. The president is yelling at television screens, evoking the probably apocryphal story of Richard Nixon in his last days arguing with the White House paintings of Kennedy and Lincoln. Yelling at television screens. Let's just hope the sets are actually on. Trump, for months, has bristled almost daily about the ongoing probes, writes Politico's Dawsey. He has sometimes, without prompting, injected, "I'm not under investigation," into conversations with associates and allies. That was written June 15th. On Friday, June 16th, Trump threw the ship fully into reverse in a tweet that seemed to confirm the opposite of all of that and included the direct quote, "I am being investigated by the man who told me to fire the FBI director." After ceaseless denials about this, Trump could now adjust his inaccurate worldview to accept what has been obvious to everybody else since at least the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel. And then suddenly he couldn't. By Sunday, June 18th, Trump had to have one of his mouthpieces go on 3 network shows and tell one of them that Trump is being investigated, and then when pressed for detail, saying, no, Trump isn't being investigated. Same interview, yes and no. Trump is so sick that he cannot continue to accept on Sunday what he had seemed to have begun to accept on Friday. Trump still had to preserve a corner of his fantasy world in which he is not only never at fault, but if indisputable reality disagrees with his delusions, indisputable reality must be wrong in some way. In the June 16th tweet, Trump blamed, quote, "a man who told me to fire the FBI director." On May 11th, Trump had claimed, quote, "regardless of recommendation, I was going to fire the FBI director." Now, in his mind, that first statement never happened. You know, of course, about last week's terrifying cabinet meeting in which Trump claimed, never has there been a president, with few exceptions, who has passed more legislation, done more things, when in fact next to nothing has passed, next to nothing has been done. And you know about the 23 minutes of praise he asked for and got from such reeking toadies, such self-servitives as Rick, "my hat is off to you, Perry," and Reince, "blessing to serve you, Priebus," and Mike, "the greatest privilege of my life, Pence," although in Pence's case that might be true. It evoked the counsels of North Korea, or perhaps the flattering of the Roman Emperor Caligula to keep him from killing everybody in the room, or maybe from the episode of The Twilight Zone, where the 6-year-old boy has the power to destroy everything on Earth merely by wishing it, and the remaining adults vie to appease him. Or, less chillingly, and perhaps more in accordance with the farce of this administration, the governor that Mel Brooks plays in his movie Blazing Saddles, who tells his cabinet that they must protect their phony baloney jobs. And they all join him in saying, "harumph, harumph." And then Brooks stops and points at one of them and says, "I didn't get a harumph out of that guy." And the holdout finally says, "harumph," and Brooks stares and points at him again and says, "You watch your ass." You know of this Monday meeting with the president of Panama in which he said, "The Panama Canal is doing quite well. I think we did a good job building it," as if it was just finished. It opened on August 15th, 1914. And maybe most disturbingly of all, there is this. Buried in a June 13th opus from Glenn Thrush, Maggie Haberman, and Julie Davis of the New York Times, what would have been in any other time, in any other presidency, a sign of desperate personal, emotional, psychological, or physical distress, but which in this one, this presidency of self-destruction, was almost an afterthought. About the conflicting stories wafting out of the White House that he might or might not fire the special counsel, quote, "The president was pleased by the ambiguity of his position on Mr. Mueller," wrote the Times trio on the 13th, "and thinks the possibility of being fired will focus the veteran prosecutor on delivering what the president desires most, a blanket public exoneration." This is where the sane, patriotic people of this country must see that we are not dealing with a president who occasionally strays into madness, but we are dealing with a madman who occasionally successfully pretends to be sane. To look at a man who is the special counsel, a man with a long, respected, and lucrative career behind him, and if he wants it, more of the same ahead after this assignment, and to think for a moment that you could get him to clear you, even if you are guilty, by threatening to fire him from a job he did not want and does not need, to assume that your only motive in life, money, is also everybody else's only motive in life, is as rational as going to the roof of the White House and to prove yourself invincible, to jump off, because you have always believed that when it was necessary, you could fly because you have a lot of money. And right now, in this atmosphere of daily, if not hourly crisis, his critics, his sycophants, his self-servitives are not going to be able to convince Trump that he cannot fly. So the country will have to hope for the best and let him jump. Resist. Peace.